I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk, now.
Hello, and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com. And joining me in the studio, he just fought 3 14-year-old boys.
Yeah.
It's Andy Greenwald!
I feel like it.
You look like it.
Thank
in a good
you.
way. In a way that feels like you triumphed.
Or that I tried.
Yeah. Greenwald, today on the pod, a good one. We are going to be talking about Sirens. The first couple episodes of that new-ish Netflix show came out last week. We're going to talk about the season finale of Everybody's Live with John Mulaney, which was aired last night. A little bit about Adults, the new FX series that just dropped its entire season on Hulu and Disney Plus and all the places you get that stuff. Today, it's a new comedy. And then we have like a larger conversation that will probably turn into essentially a 2-part discussion about this weekend's upcoming HBO release, Mountainhead, which is the first big work from Jesse Armstrong since Succession ended 2 years ago, almost to the day. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of the showrunner in our contemporary moment of television. Hopefully a fun conversation for folks. And then on Monday, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about Mountainhead itself.
Do you think we should lean heavily on the thoughts of our own showrunner of The Watch, Kaya? I think she's nodding like she has a lot to say.
I bet she does.
We should also say, I think, well, actually 2 things. One, I said this to you on the phone, but I want to put it on mic. We are talking about Jesse Armstrong's new project 2 years, like you said, like to the weekend, like almost exactly since Succession ended. Would you like to go on record with your thoughts on the Succession finale now?
I thought it was okay.
It's awesome.
I thought it was masterful. I thought it was great. Yeah.
Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, you made the joke about fighting 14-year-olds. I do think it's worth mentioning to our listeners that we are both struggling with some physical ailments today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on a wellness journey,
Godspeed, brother.
I can't lift my arms over my head, but gotta get strong, baby.
Are there moments during today's podcast when you would ordinarily throw your arms up in a touchdown gesture?
It's honestly, it's holding a steering wheel, which I find challenging, which other Los Angeles drivers.
Clearly. And this is my thing, which is I've done something to my lower back and it doesn't feel good. I'm sitting during a podcast, I'll say, but the worst thing is sitting and driving. That's the worst thing. This is also part of my quiet attempt to steer this into just an aging podcast, which it already low-key is.
It's a loud attempt.
It's very loud.
Yeah.
No, but like our old pal Adam Pally has a new podcast just about like health journeys.
Does he?
Yeah. So if they covered 10% more prestige television, and then we took 10% back of like, this new Japanese lidocaine patch really lightens the load.
Do you have Japanese lidocaine patches?
I make it sound fancy. They sell them at Walgreens. It's
okay.
Not like, no free ads, but... I've got 6 on my body right now, and I'm not telling you where.
Walgreens is still cranking them out? It's Rite Aid is filing.
Rite Aid's done.
Yeah.
Walgreens and CVS are cranking them out in the sense that cranking the security windows in front of all of the items. You know what I mean? So you can't actually get anything.
When I go into my Rite Aid, still there.
What if it's the only one?
It's the closest I'll ever get to Once Upon a Time in the West, where like you walk in and like a tumbleweed blows across the aisle, and the security guard is like looking at you with a cheroot in his mouth.
I had a similar experience when I took the girls to a movie theater. They were like, "Oh, are we going to?" And they named like the 3 movie theaters we often go to. And I was like, "No, it's near them, but a little bit further down, a little bit like east of Pasadena." And they were immediately like, "We don't want to do this." And I was like, "I'm the one taking you to the Minecraft movie. I don't want to do this. I found a movie theater that has cheap matinees. Is there a reason why it's cheap?
Matinees.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Was it a little off the beaten path? Yeah. Did they not have popcorn?
A print of Minecraft?
Basically.
Yeah.
But we got there, and then I needed to, this part of the story isn't important, but we had to go to a drugstore. No, now it sounds worse. There was parking. I needed to pay cash for parking. There was an ATM so I walked into what appeared to be a normal, maybe now I'm realizing it, Rite Aid. And I walked in and immediately it was Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
It was just way too clean, way too empty. 2 people working here, the size of an airplane hangar, and everything else looked like it was lit like the fake plastic trees video.
Yeah.
And they just had a lot of like 6 items of like one kind of detergent.
Let me tell you
one
something
kind of
really
hot
interesting.
Takis.
Honestly, we can cut this whole part.
No. We're going to promote this. Kai's already clipping this for
I have
social.
an issue where I might be addicted to Aquafina. Like, no other water actually makes me feel hydrated. Did I ever tell you that?
I don't know if you want to brag about this, but let's hear about it.
So recently,
It's
and I'm
terrible
not
water.
disparaging the Aquafina Corporation or whatever, like arms dealer
You
owns
mean
it.
Pepsi? But
Yeah.
go on.
I can't find it at most supermarkets. And then I walked into my Rite Aid,
Yeah.
and half of the store was Aquafina.
So do you think the algorithm the entity did this for you?
No, I just think it's like they got the last Aquafina. You know what I mean? Like,
And what are the odds? It's right in your backyard. You understand that like Dasani and Aquafina are just Coke and Pepsi buying galaxy-sized Brita filters and just running
whatever
tap
it is,
water
I just
through
don't
it.
feel right drinking other water.
Any other water.
Not morally. I mean, physically, I don't feel like it quenches my thirst.
I think it's the plastics.
Probably. But
I think
like
your
that,
body's like,
here's where we're at, though.
Yeah.
We're talking about our wellness journeys, where we are in our lives.
You're much further behind than I thought.
My boat sailed, dog. I'm playing with house money now.
Talk about it.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, I don't want to destroy the world, but I think I'm pretty low on the list of people who are doing it.
Okay.
And like with microplastic, with plastic bottles, like single-use bottles.
Oh, you sweet baby.
And
I'm not worried about the plastics for the world. I'm saying every bottle of Aquafina is adding a little bit to your own personal
but
supply.
I did 4 pods this week. You know what I mean? Like, what do people want from me? The Aquafina is what's keeping me going.
Do you think? It's the only thing that makes you feel, quote, hydrated?
Yeah.
You could tell the difference. If we did a water taste test on this podcast.
I certainly could taste certain textures and flavors.
Textures and flavors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of different brands. But I don't know what our advertising opportunities are going forward. Certainly, if Aquafina is interested in a spokesperson,
It's you.
it's literally me.
You understand there is no cohort of Aquafina advocates. Like, I don't think anyone is like, that's the shit. I don't see any
Don't erase
like,
me, I'm right
Jenners
here.
or Kardashians sporting it in their Birkins. You know what I mean?
Oh,
You
yeah, 'cause
are.
they have such high standards. Yeah.
I'm just saying, you always think I'm coming to attack you. I'm actually saying there is no,
Oh, like I've cornered the market.
what the Lorax is for the trees, you could be for Aquafina, killer of trees. That could be you.
Well,
You both have mustaches.
yeah, I need a second act in this American life, you know?
God, this really is fascinating.
Let's talk about
to me.
some Netflix shows. Now, also
Okay.
on Monday, we're going to probably discuss Department Q, which is the new show from, among other people, Scott Frank.
Yeah.
And it is a Scotland set murder mystery show. I'll put it that way, detective cop show.
It's like a Scandi noir, but it has been moved to Glasgow. It is based on, I believe, a Danish series.
Yes, and stars Matthew Good and is quite good. I enjoyed what I've watched of it so far.
Me too.
We're going to talk about that on Monday. Also on Netflix right now is Sirens. So why don't I'm going to?
You want to do Sirens before Mulaney? Okay.
No, that's a good point. I just don't want to. I like Mulaney. Like, what do you want to say about Mulaney?
Nothing other than I loved it.
He
I
fought
loved the
the boys.
experience. He fought the boys. Now, here's good old parochial me. I was clock watching. I was like, he's throwing to Slater-Kinney at like 7:56.
Slater-Kinney was the musical guest. Yes.
And I was like, he's going to say we ran out of time to fight the boys. He's dodging. And then I realized it's Netflix and time slots are artificial construction. And of course, it ran over and he did fight the boys.
You know who else is playing with house money with their lungs is Sean Penn. I feel like he's like, I'm on third base. I can keep smoking. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it got him here.
Yeah.
I feel like
He smoked on Mulaney, which I thought
at
was
least 3 darts went down.
Yeah.
While he was on the couch. Don't you think though, like there are very few of those stories of like, well, you know, they got me this far
Yes.
that end awesome. You know? Like
Sure.
I think when these things take a turn, you know, there is that, I didn't think the leopards would eat my face.
I think that this, God bless him,
Yeah.
one of our great artists, David Lynch is a good example.
Well,
of
that's
this,
what I'm thinking
Right?
of.
Like smoked American spirits right up to the not quite very end, but like at the end was like, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
due to the emphysema.
Yes.
I think Harry Dean Stanton was the only one maybe who just floated away in a Marlboro cloud, like in his 90s.
Yeah.
Just smoking to the end. So, you know, I guess he's the pace car. And if you can do
He
your
really
best to keep up.
is.
Sean Penn out here curing disease, but inhaling disease. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So Sean Penn's presence was ultimately an example of why, like first of all, the show found its footing. We talked about it at length last week. I love the show. It was it felt a little bit like one more, fuck you, I do what I want.
Mhm.
Because, it opened with Sandler as the guest
Yeah.
and a teen named Zephyrine, I believe. And they were delightful couch guests. Sandler, by the way, just takes such palpable pleasure in other people being funny that he is awesome to have around.
Yes.
And then you add the younger comedian Joe Mandy, who has a funny special that just went up, and then you add Sean Penn.
Yep.
Which feels a little willfully
Talking
obtuse.
about the rules of beaches in
Street fighting.
and street fighting, yeah.
Which it was relevant, I guess, but he wasn't. I don't know if he knew precisely the type of show that he was on. In fact, maybe no one knew. But they really, I just felt like they really were in the driver's seat for this finale. How did you feel about the actual boy fight?
Pretty good
at the end.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, I'm glad. In some ways, it was like I'm so glad that they played it straight.
Yeah, there was no secret
Joke.
bit. It really was. They were trying to get him down, and it was also sort of sweet that they were just kids, and he's a what did he say that he used to talk about his girlish hips like. So there wasn't. It's not like anyone was taking headshots or swinging. They were just really just trying to bring him down, which he did, and was relatively gracious about it. And then we were all rewarded because then Bone Thugs and Harmony came out.
That's right. He did get Bone Thugs to show up for he had tried earlier in the season to bring them together, and finally they came back.
Do you know what's the ultimate heat check, or is it the opposite of heat check? Because I don't actually know how to use that phrase correctly. All rappers who were famous when we were kids or in high school, you Google them to be like, oh, I wonder how, Lazy Bone is doing or whatever, which I did. And unrelated to Mulaney, I did this 2 months ago.
Okay.
They're all 50. They're like 2 years older than us. Like when they were famous, they were 17 or 18 or 19. That's wild.
Are you saying that they peaked too early? And that life must be complicated for them now? Or?
No. Would you like to have that conversation? No. I feel like there's a robust, legacy act touring market that probably keeps them.
Certainly.
Right.
And there always has been. There always has been like a secret. Like I remember, I think I've told this story, and it's not really like much of an anecdote, but when I moved to New York City and I looked in the back of the Village Voice, this is in 2000.
Yeah.
You see Big Daddy Kane and Rock M are playing SOBs, and you're like, did I just arrive on the most perfect weekend ever?
Yes.
Oh my God. And then you look in the Village Voice next week, and they're like, Big Daddy Kane and Rock M are playing SOBs.
No, they're playing Wetlands probably.
Yeah, but it's like, oh, so this is even in 2000 when those guys were only 8 years, whatever, removed from the peaks of their fame.
My thing is, Ice Cube has been famous since we were 11. Mm-hmm. He's only 55.
And he's on the studio. Like he was on the studio this season.
Like, I'm just saying, it's a long life.
Yeah.
If you get famous when you're a teenager. Like those boys on Mulaney last night.
That's right.
Anyway, I thought it was excellent. I really hope they bring it back. There's just, like we said last week, it is just a mix of highbrow and lowbrow and convention and unconventional that we don't get. And
have you spoken to your parliamentary team about how you're going to finagle this in the top 10 at the end of the year?
Oh, I thought you meant how I was going to make it part of the big, beautiful bill to fund it. When you said parliament, I forgot what country we lived in. What a pleasant fantasy it was to think we were in a different one. No, but the committee is meeting. Yeah. The subcommittee is meeting about it. It is interesting to note that, like, if they want more of this, I hope that they, in the spirit of everyone kind of being like, okay, let's get these shows on a clock. Yeah. That like they decide soon and not like in December when it'll take 6 more months to get everyone and then they'll be that far out of rhythm.
Yes, I think it would be cool if this became an annual 12-week run. I think that it would have been neat if he had taken 6 weeks or a month or whatever and come back later in the summer and been like, we've done this, and this differently. Obviously, Mulaney is really busy, but I did think it was a really cool thing to have as like a background marker of each week over the last few weeks. And that's just what TV is supposed to be, which are going to kind of talk a little bit about way TV's changed in a little bit. Sirens, we can kind of run through these a little bit more briefly. Can you tell me a little bit about the background for Sirens?
Yeah, Sirens is created by Molly Smith Metzler, who is someone that I know in real life, and it is based on a play that she wrote back in 2011 called LMNOP, and it is the next offering of her Netflix overall deal that she signed after creating and executive producing Made with, oh my God, what's her name?
Margaret Qualley.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. And it is So 5 episodes dropped this week. I was really taken with the show. And the reason why I was taken with the show is because it has the trappings of what, put this in quotes, put a trademarks emoji after it, what everybody wants, right? There is a robust, not running dry market in upscale, inside the homes of rich and successful people with dark secrets genre. I mean, I think
Big Little Lies,
9 Perfect Strangers back this week. Your silence on it has been deafening.
White Lotus. I wonder, is it going to be delayed at all because Mike White's going on Survivor 50?
I wondered if you had a take on that.
I don't. I mean, I think it's amazing, and I can't imagine going through the physical and emotional turmoil of White Lotus and then be like, I would like to go on Survivor now.
What's crazy is it probably won't. If everything that we have come to understand about him and his writing is true, it may have been baked in. Maybe he's already filmed it, right? Like when they're announcing stuff, haven't they already done some of it?
Well, they just announced the cast. I don't know if they've left yet.
I'm not sure. This is something I can't speak to.
Anyway, Sirens.
But anyway, so there's a robust market for this, and it's clearly reflected in, like, I think it's number 2 on Netflix's top 10 already. What I like about the show is that it is not that. Now, the framework is not a familiar one, but you could slot it easily into a description of something like White Lotus. The conceit is Megan Fahey from White Lotus plays a young woman named Devin who's taking care of her ailing father in Buffalo, New York.
Played by the god Bill Camp.
Bill Camp, phenomenal as always, and is infuriated by the absence of her younger sister, Simone, played by Millie Alcock, who was on the first season of House of the Dragon.
On House of the Dragon,
and she will be Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, in a film coming out next summer. And so in order to exact revenge for the receipt of a thoughtless edible arrangement, Devin grabs the fruit and goes to what appears to be like
Montauk? Hamptons?
Yeah, Hamptons, the fancy part of Long Island, to confront her sister, who is working as a tireless 24/7 personal assistant to an incredibly, impossibly rich woman who also enjoys falconry, played by Julianne Moore. And the show is weirder than its conceit. It's consistently funnier than its conceit. There are elements of supernatural or something extra going on, and then there's just elements of satire that I really appreciate. Like Felix Solis plays the head of the house staff, and all one has to do is say his name, and he appears like a genie. There's also undercutting. Oh, and Kevin Bacon is in the show as Julianne Moore's husband, and Glenn Howerton from your show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is pretty funny.
How many episodes of that have you seen in real life?
How many have there been?
Hundreds.
3.
Okay.
No, I've seen the Chase Utley one 3 times. But doesn't that count for something?
Sure it does, man. Any effort is an effort.
Anyway, what I really liked about the show is, and this is sort of a difficult thing to parse, and maybe it does come from knowing Molly a little bit, but like there is always been a healthy lifeline of playwrights to TV.
Yes.
My God, I'm having trouble with names today. I think I'm going to blame my lower back ailment. But is that possible? Is anyone listening?
William Shakespeare? Is that who you're trying to think of?
No, Orange is the New Black. The woman who created
Genji Cohen?
Genji Cohen, thank you.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah. She's I think personally responsible for bringing out lots of playwrights, including Liz and Carly, who created Glow. And there's a certain cadence and a certain interest in internal lives that playwrights just naturally bring because that's the medium that they were trained in. And so when you have scenes between Megan Fahey and Millie Alcock in this, the directions that they take, like actually if you were doing a Kirk Goldsberry style like
heat map,
of the shots, they come from surprising places that immediately jolts you and for at least for me makes me lean in. Similarly, like the Falcon stuff, it's just like not exactly what you would expect in a show like this. And then the other piece of it that I really enjoy is at a time like this time, that the show has a deeply skeptical point of view, and particularly a grounded point of view character in Devin that is looking askance at the enormous wealth.
I see what you're saying.
I really appreciate it. I just think it is coming at all of this, and I'm talking about the mansion and the spa treatments and the treatment of staff and having a staff and all of it, not from a place of, boy, wouldn't it be nice even if I then had a frosty relationship with my rich husband, but from a, what the fuck?
Right.
I kind of like that undercurrent that is really speaking to me at the moment. So I found it to be, it's frothy, which I think is exciting to Netflix. It's fun, which I think is exciting to hopefully a larger audience. But I think it's thoughtful in a way that is making me lean in.
Yeah, it's an interesting package of a season, just 5 episodes. I actually don't know much about like the end and whether it's conceived of as a limited series or whether it's an ongoing project, but really, really perfectly cast is the thing I came away with.
Phase.
Bacon as the kind of mysterious, aloof husband who arrives from the business trip. Fahey's fantastic and kind of fun that she gets to now play, like you're saying,
the other side of it.
She was the guest at one of these places, and now she's the outsider
who keeps getting kicked
and
off the grounds.
Alcock's really good. She's like a real force of nature, and I always got time for Julianne Moore. It's a cool show. I'll definitely keep watching it.
It's interesting. The last thing I'll say about it, I want to finish it, and maybe we'll get another chance to talk about it. But whenever we use it, there's a phrase we overuse, and in fact, I made a joke about it the other week that I then didn't explain. Like all good jokes need to be explained to people. And the look you gave me is still seared into my eye when
What's it?
I was like, well, blah blah blah, and I'm living inside of a wooden horse, and you were just like, is that why your back hurts? I was basically saying that so much of professional screenwriting is Trojan horsing. Yeah. And I was saying that I do that too.
When will we get to the point where the Trojan horse is actually just to do a drama?
That's what I'm saying. When we use it, it's essentially saying, boy, we wish there were more straight up and down like detective crime shows, but in order to do one, you have to make it in the Marvel universe or whatever. I think maybe we're being limited with our view of what the Trojans could do with wood and horses.
I don't know much about it, honestly.
Only to say
I've been
that
saying it for 11 years.
This is an interesting. This show, at least through 2 episodes that I've watched, is a very interesting drama about sisters, about family obligations, and about class. And
it's tacked onto a show about look at all the pretty dresses and canapes and
the dresses are pretty, and they are on a beach, and they filmed in New York in the summertime. So
did they?
They did.
Oh, I thought it might have been Toronto.
No, what was it? By the way, you were the one that was like for the studio finale. You were like, what, did they green screen this entire casino?
That was not my experience of a Las Vegas hotel room.
I understand that, but there are still people out there, and I love being on video. I think it's awesome, and I was for it from the beginning. But the one thing that I thought that it could do would be finally root out the subsection of people who think that our voices are coming out of the wrong mouths from their experience listening to the podcast. And yet it still happens to the point where...
I'm not in a Philip K. Dick story. I don't know how to process that information when people are like, I thought that your body was Andy's body or something.
Sometimes we forget whose body is whose, man. We've been friends a long time. You can have my working arms and I'll take your trunk. Despite all the maybe it's the plastic that's accumulated there, like that big trash island in the Pacific that keeps you really buoyant.
All gotten in between my vertebrae.
But that's why you're up.
Yeah.
Anyway, all of this was to say that someone was just like, I can't believe Greenwald thought that they didn't film on location for the studio.
Oh, and that was me.
And it was you.
Yeah.
You gotta own it.
I didn't say I didn't think they shot on location. It's a very expensive show. I was just like, I haven't seen the Zoe Kravitz suite at Caesars.
Right.
That's
and
all I'm
then,
saying.
like, the Apple's marketing team and the studio gang released what seems to be endless footage of them making the show.
Yes.
Just like Bryan Cranston's standing over a fake canal in Vegas with 6 THR cameras capturing every minute. And Matt Bellamy doing a podcast in the boat.
Let's move to another new release, which would be Adults. That's on FX. This one is courtesy of 2 creators, Ben Cronengold and Rebecca Shaw, and is very much in the tradition of Friends, How I Met Your Mother, group of young pals living together and living all over each other. I want to say this. This is one where the first couple of episodes, I couldn't tell if I was feeling old or if the show was like pitched at a frequency that wasn't quite where I wanted it to be or what I thought it should be. And I admired, but also didn't particularly like care for how forcefully provocative it was, which is very funny because like when it comes to gun violence apparently on screen, I'll be like, that's something I haven't seen before. Well done, you know? Like,
by the way, 90% of people who begin that sentence wouldn't end where you ended that sentence. When it comes to gun violence on screen, how much is too much? Not in CR's Plastic Beach.
That's an example of it. I started a sentence and I really didn't know how to finish it.
That's the story of podcasting. I love it. I'm here for you.
Aquafina brain to the max. So anyway, this series starts off and I think it goes to great lengths to just show like how out of touch I am. You know, that's not what the purpose of the show was. The third episode though is where I felt like maybe more traditional sitcom bones kicked in. Right. And some of this, it really just leapt out at me how great it was. And I really wanted to...
That's the episode called Have You Seen This Man?
Yes. And I wanted to shout out one performer in particular from this, which is Owen Thiel, which I thought he plays a guy named Anton on the show and is hysterical in this third episode.
He's really good.
And we could talk about it a little bit more since it just dropped. I don't want to get too into like this happens and then this happens. And I'm gonna probably finish it because I love shows like this. Generally, I just find them very comforting to watch. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, I felt well. First of all, what you're saying about like traditional sitcom things taking over, I want to shout out again. Based on this is just from the results. We actually have no insight into the process, but FX's half-hour development. Is pretty unimpeachable at this moment. And one of the secret things that they do that is absolutely, by the way, not a secret, like they're very clear about this, and we talked to Brian Jordan Alvarez about this when we were talking to him about English Teacher, is that in the half-hour space, they can do things at what they call at a price point, which I think we all know what that means. There are no restaurants in Los Angeles that are currently at a price point, for example, just so you understand what I mean when I say that.
I spent $20 on a turkey sandwich yesterday.
That's so depressing. And they can take chances on different ideas, younger creators, and then what they do is they take people who are passionate about the world that they've created, whether it's for themselves to star in or for others, and then they bring in some veterans who have been there before. So
Stephanie Robinson worked on adults, right?
Stephanie Robinson from Atlanta and from What We Do in the Shadows is an EP on adults. Jonathan Kreisel, who's directed tons of great comedy, is one of the...
Kroll's on this too, right?
He's one of the executive producers and directors. Nick Kroll is an executive producer of the whole series and directed an episode. Jason Wallner, who's done all crazy stuff.
Bunch of Modern Family and stuff,
but also, I think he's done like, Borat type stuff, and he started on Human Giant. So there are people who have the experience in the trenches, and that really did influence my watch. I kind of at this point know when I'm firing up a brand new sitcom, particularly one from brand new creators, that what to look for. It's kind of like when Keith Law goes to check out like a AAA team or something. He's just like the way he's
his gait.
You can teach this, but you can't teach bat speed or whatever. So there were things in the pilot.
Incredible Keith Law drop.
I've been on The Athletic a bunch recently because Andrew Painter's coming. So I'm just full disclosure. So there were things in the pilot that I felt were noisy in the ways that a written pilot to get the job might be.
That's kind of what I was saying. It's not that I was scandalized by it as much as I was like, I think I'm supposed to be like dazzled here.
But also who's supposed to be dazzled there is Nick Grad at FX reading it on the page. It's eventually what this will live or die on being a hang. And a good hang. And I think people understand that. And it's cast that way. I mean, we can talk about the cast chemistry is pretty excellent from jump. In the pilot, there's a scene where Issa, who's kind of the most out there of the roommates, is claiming her right to be in a protected place. And so she pulls out a woman card. Then she pulls out an immigrant card. And they're literal cards. And I was like, that's a thing that was in the pilot that is never going to happen again. That is like what level of reality we're in.
Yeah, that's why I think I reacted to 3 so well.
And by the time, so if you look at it from 1 to 3, getting to a place where like, oh, I know these people, I know their interactions, and I know what's going to happen when it's kind of heightened, and you get to 3, and to credit to Cronengold and Shaw and their vision for the show, because there are aspects of it that are familiar, like misunderstandings, or one group goes to do this thing, and we try different pairings or groupings of characters. But the opening scene that Anton that you're talking about, that is so that is funny, where he is basically, he can't stop befriending people.
Yes.
He
creates intimacy with people.
Immediately, and he's airplaying his 4,000 texts, all of whom are under names like, Neil with the leash, or nice straight flight attendant, or whatever. And like, that is what the show, that's the argument for the show.
Yeah.
Not that we are like button pushing, and the show was originally called Snowflakes. What we're doing is like, comedy is comedy, and then how can we update the context? So I appreciated that.
They become, instead of like keywords, they become characters in the third episode.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's funny, like, all this is to say, I'm still okay with it. Like, I'm not so fired up and making the case that this is the next hot shit, you know? Because shows like this take a minute to find themselves and to sort of ease into it. And there were moments like in the second episode, I mean, the tenor of the show is loud. Like
the
all
bathroom
these people,
scene in the second episode is like,
they are all yelling
a
lot. And I don't know, are you familiar with Ben Cronengold and Rebecca Shaw prior to their creation of the show? They became semi-famous for their speech at the Yale commencement in 2018.
Didn't have that in my YouTube save for later's yet.
Oh, I was there. That's weird. I got an honorary doctorate from Yale for my contributions to this podcast.
Okay.
And
you should check with the federal
have you seen
government,
this?
make
You
sure
know
it's
what I'm
still
talking about?
valid.
Hasn't come up in my algorithm so weirdly.
Well, you're a fucking weird guy. You know that, right?
I reject that.
You're like, I reject the internet, but I read Keith Law updates about Andrew Painter and Yale commencement speeches.
I read Keith Law for the cultural takes.
Yeah.
The baseball stuff just comes secondary.
The recipes.
For his recipes and like his opinions on television.
Does anybody even listening to this pod know who Keith Law is?
Okay, by the way, yes. And they will text us. Tim Simon's probably firing up a text right now. No, I thought we would, like, this is a thing that okay, should we do a little behind the curtain here?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of these guys either, but then like I read
you
reviews.
Googled them.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You made it sound like you
Because
watched
that's what
this
we do
4
sometimes
years ago.
to like fake authority.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Don't you do that sometimes for clout? Like when you pretend to do baseball when you were a kid?
What do you pretend to do baseball? What are you talking about?
I thought that was just a story to make yourself look stronger.
I'm about to flip this fucking table over.
Except you can't because you hurt yourself and you drink too much plastic. So, marked safe today.
Yeah.
From Lou Ferrigno over here. Anyway, I know you did travel baseball.
All right, man.
You were good at it. You blocked the plate.
I'm going to take this personally in about 3 seconds.
The point is, they did a bit as like 22-year-olds in front of Hillary Clinton about how they were giving a speech and then they broke up during the speech. And it was very like, to the rafters with this comedy. And that's the voice is all I'm saying. And I'll say that as someone who watched these 3 episodes at different moments of the day with different levels of lower back pain, there were moments where I was like, really like the pilot, was not as into the second, really like the third, and it was more about me than about the show.
Sure.
The show is finding its rhythm and it's finding its voice. And generally, I find like very, very strident criticisms of new comedies based on the first few episodes or even the first 8 episodes, which is what the season is, to be not really that useful in terms of what things
You're
are going to
so
become.
level-headed today. I love this. Maybe your back injury has really brought you into a new critical space.
I'm on a lot of medication.
Okay.
Can you tell?
Why don't we do this broader conversation? So adults, you should check it out. Sirens, like we mentioned, we're fans of. Department Q, I would recommend.
Yeah, we'll hit that next week. Right?
Yeah, let's take a step back and have like a broader conversation about the role of the showrunner in 2025 in this contemporary moment in television. And I think it's worth mentioning that Jesse Armstrong is returning to our screens on Sunday night with Mountainhead from HBO. It's about 4 tech titans of industry having a sort of reunion gathering at a mountain estate in Utah as the world literally is falling apart.
And to reiterate, we're not spoiling it.
Not spoiling. That's all in the trailer. If you like Succession, I think you'll like this movie.
That's nice.
And what I wanted to talk about was how interesting I thought it was that Jesse Armstrong chose to make a film that wound up being on HBO, make a film that wound up being on HBO, at least in terms of the credits, with basically the gang from Succession. Nicholas Britell does the music for Mountainhead, Tony Roche, Lucy Preble, all these people. Mark Mylod is a executive producer.
A lot of the greatest hitters from the writer's room get producer's credit, suggesting that they were involved at some level in the creative process
Sure.
for a movie that ultimately is written and directed by Jesse.
Correct. And I thought this was a fascinating decision on Jesse's part. I hope we get to ask him about it. And I wanted to talk to you about the showrunners that we've talked about consistently over the course of podcasting together. So going back to 2012 when we were doing Hollywood Prospectus with Grantland, and now with The Watch since 2015. We've obviously gone through a bunch of different phases of television. When we first started, there was this great creative flowering, and I think is widely regarded as the golden age of television, this Sopranos, Wire, Mad Men era. And then you basically had, at that point, networks doing provocative, cutting-edge comedies like, 30 Rock. You had premium cable networks changing the paradigm of what scripted dramas could be. You had shows doing quite well ratings-wise or not doing quite well ratings-wise, but everybody who watched them insisted on talking about them. So you had this storm of conversation surrounding shows. And over the years, obviously, we've had the streaming revolution. We've had the IP explosion, the intellectual property explosion, the franchiseification of a lot of TV shows. We've had COVID. And we've had strikes.
Yeah.
So over the course of these 10 years or 11 years that we've been talking, we've had all these different phases, stages of the role of the showrunner. And I wanted to use Jesse as kind of a way to get into talking about a bunch of the people that maybe they're the shows that they were best known for ended during our run.
And what I really appreciate about that very nice introduction you just did was really making it clear that these careers are existing, because they are still existing, they're still ongoing, in a time of just profound existential industry-wide change. It's like, it actually, in a weird way, it is a test case for those sort of hypotheticals that you see on websites like The Athletic, where Keith Law works, which is basically like, if a player existed in multiple eras, would they be able to recreate those stats across eras of a sport? Because when you look at, and we'll get into some specifics in a minute, but if you look at the touchdown points of certain creators existing in the boom times, then leaving for a few years, whether it's to develop things or to just muse or to count the residuals, and then returning, the earth shifted under that person's feet and they're returning to a different landscape. So it is more interesting, I think, to consider it, because whatever version we used to have of a storied, successful, maybe even legendary television career, it's kind of all out the window. You can't really be Stephen Bochco anymore. If that was ever the goal.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning with people like Bochco and David E. Kelley. And
even David E. Kelley can't be David E. Kelley anymore. He's completely changed his career.
Yes, and he's become a purveyor of limited series in some ways, and has really found a lane, and is still prolific. But there are plenty of people that we're not going to discuss today that probably will hear this discussion, or if they heard this discussion, they would be like, well, what about Greg Berlanti? Or what about this person? Or what about this person? And I completely understand. This is about the people that kind of Andy and I were really focused on when we were first podcasting.
Or their shows, particularly.
And I think we thought in our minds, maybe subconsciously, this is how it's always going to be. We're always going to be drawn to a work because of the name that we associate with it as an author.
Right.
Now, I just wanted to ask you briefly, if you could tell me succinctly, I guess, just for the sake of the pod, what would you describe for people who are I have no idea what you guys are talking about? What is a showrunner in 2025?
Jeez. It's a good question, one that I am not fully prepared for.
Well, give me a couple of different versions of it. Then.
Well, not in a, I didn't mean you caught me off guard, but that it is essentially, and people have heard some version of this spiel before, but showrunner is not an official title.
Yes.
It is essentially the title bestowed upon often in this case, the creator of the show. And when I don't mean this case, but often in contemporary terms, it means the creator of the show or the head writer of the show, who is also an executive producer, who the buck stops with that person. Yes. Ultimately has final cut, has decision-making power over every aspect of the production, and thus is the person who, I'll put it this way, that the thing that I liked about the job when I was able to do it was that I was the first person with my laptop with the script, blinking, writing, interior, whatever. And a whole lot of stuff happened in between. New groups of people would come in, producers would come in, and then writers came in, and then writers left, and then actors came in, and then, cinematographer and wardrobe people and lighting people, and then we were in production and location people, and then they all left, and then the editors came in, and the post-production team, and then the sound artists and mixers and Foley, and then they leave, and then color correction comes in, and then press, and all those people come in, and I was in every one of those rooms.
Sure.
And that was awesome and fascinating and interesting. And that, I think, ultimately is what a showrunner is in this day and age. The person who is there from sun up to sundown, in charge of basically everything. And there, nothing, and it'll come up here. I think auteur theory is kind of hackneyed and not really accurate, because anything successful is a testament to a collaboration at an enormously complicated scale.
And almost every single one of these people, the ones that we've spoken with, or if you read interviews with them, they'll say like, well, this was down to this, and this was down to this collaboration.
And even, I know I'm still struck by it. I know you were too, but when Tony Gilroy was on the other week talking about Andor, I mean, this is someone who does not come from the world of showrunning. He comes from movies and has written and directed an Oscar-winning film in Michael Clayton. And the degree of collaboration that he experienced as the showrunner of Andor, and then his gratitude for it, was palpable.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible opportunity.
That's exemplified by making his production designer and executive
Exactly.
producer.
It's an incredible responsibility. But ultimately, anything successful, the creative buck has to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're talking about.
So one of the things I wanted to do was take some of the showrunners whose series ended during whose sort of most notable series has ended during me and Andy's history of podcasting. Talk a little bit about their apprenticeship, or how they came up, what they're best known for, and what they've done since then, as a way of talking about how interesting it is, specifically about Jesse Armstrong, but where maybe this more recent generation or more recent iteration of the showrunner is going.
Because I also think the framing is Jesse Armstrong is back a lot quicker than most people. Almost outrageously quickly, because we'll talk more about it on Monday. The Mountainhead was filmed 2 months ago and is debuting this weekend.
Yes.
That's wild.
It is incredible. And I have a lot of questions about how they were able to pull that off. But let's start with someone who I think you could associate with that golden age, who's got a show that is on a lot of people's Mount Rushmore of television series from the century, if not all time. And that's Vince Gilligan, who's best known for Breaking Bad. Now, Gilligan came up through network writers' rooms and worked on X-Files, and famously with a bunch of really talented writers who came out of that X-Files room. He was best known for Breaking Bad, which ended in 2013. And since then, let me just run down Vince Gilligan's post-Breaking Bad career. Battle Creek was a network kind of week-to-week procedural that he was based on an old script that he wrote like 10 years prior, but David Schur, who did House, wound up actually running Battle Creek, but that got made. He wrote and directed El Camino, which was the Breaking Bad sequel film on Netflix. He worked extensively on Better Call Saul, but Peter Gould
was the showrunner.
He apparently had an unrealized or an unproduced Jim Jones series.
Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid, not...
No, I mean, this is... And he was maybe going to start... He was developing it with Octavia Spencer.
Cool.
And that never happened. And up next, officially, he has a untitled Apple series that he has described as sci-fi leaning.
Mild sci-fi,
yeah, with Ray Seahorn.
And that got a 2-season order,
which is kind of par for the course from Apple. So, but I
think Apple gives out a lot of soft wink, wink. It would be hard for us to cancel you, but rarely do shows get 2 seasons out the gate.
Yes, and obviously Gilligan making his move. He had been with AMC. He's done stuff with Netflix. And Netflix was largely responsible for. I wouldn't say largely responsible, but had a huge role in the popularization of Breaking Bad because of people being able to catch up with it on Netflix, binge it on Netflix.
Not to be that guy. Like, he's still with Sony. He's always been with Sony.
Correct me where I'm wrong.
So his deal has always been with Sony TV. Sony made the show for AMC, but because it was an independent studio, then there was some licensing and Netflixy stuff that got involved. And then his former bosses or collaborators, honestly, because he's been doing it for so long at Sony, Zach and Jamie are the ones who run Apple TV.
Right.
So that felt like, I'm not saying it was collusion, but that was a natural home for his next project.
Now, Gilligan's an interesting person just to talk about, because I think You've obviously had this experience working on Harry Potter, if you don't mind me saying so, with Francesca Gardner, who worked on Succession.
I don't mind.
Gilligan's interesting because he's created his own kind of coaching tree in the Greg Popovich sense of the word. Like, people have come out of Breaking Bad, whether they've stayed in the Breaking Bad universe to some extent with Better Call Saul, like Peter Gould, or they've gone on to do other things like Maura Wally Beckett, like Thomas Schnauz, like Sam Catlin, like
Jennifer Hutchison,
who have gone on to run their own shows, write on other shows, produce on other shows. Any larger thoughts that jump out about where Gilligan has gone over the course of his post-Breaking Bad career?
I mean, all of it is going to be pretty 10,000 foot because we've never crossed paths with him. We've never had the chance to interview him. I think what's notable about him and the next person we're going to speak about is that they are bridge creators in the sense that they worked on TV 1.0, essentially.
Yeah.
Vince Gilligan was himself part of Chris Carter's coaching tree on The X-Files.
Yeah.
He spent time as like the hot young movie writer. Remember, he wrote that movie Home Fries with Luke Wilson and Drew Barrymore in the early part of his career. He did a lot of kind of like work-a-day scripted stuff. Often when we have the opportunity to create TV, having created TV, it also means you have experienced how you would like this to go. And by all accounts, he is a very genial guy and a good boss and a good collaborator, and he's kept his collaborators close. Given them opportunities to have run their own thing, like Peter Gould, but kept one foot in it. And I think the real test is forthcoming. Like, big picture, by the way, I want to be clear, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about Weiner too. I want to. You weren't doing this, but it's not like when we talk about television creators and their work. It's not like we would talk about musicians being like, well, they had 2 good albums, then they had a bad album, or then they never lived up to the albums. Breaking Bad and its attendant shows is almost 2 decades of professional work. And it's exceptional and enormous. And even getting to make a show half as good at that is incredibly, incredibly rare. So when we talk about like the Vince Gilligan sci-fi show that's coming up, we're going to take it on its own merits. But it's like we're not going to be mad at Paul McCartney for being in Wings.
Well, this is why I wanted to bring up Gilligan first, not only chronologically, but also because of the idea that you can do 2 things if you've got this. Some people would call it an albatross. Some people would call it a trophy. But when you have a trophy show that you probably will be in the first paragraph of your obituary, you can either run away from it and say, I'm going to do something completely different. It's completely divorced from that.
Yep.
Or you can kind of lean into it. And I think Gilligan is very, very expertly leaned into it by not only supporting other people as they played around in the sandbox, and Better Call Saul at times and maybe with history, we'll look back and say it might even be better than Breaking Bad in some ways. It's a different show, but it is like a huge accomplishment. He also did El Camino. So obviously there is an attachment to this story and these characters that it took him a while to kind of flush out of the system.
There's also something to be said, and I just said, let's not use music analogies, but now I'm going to.
Please.
There are artists who are some of our favorite artists who only make one kind of music.
Absolutely.
And they do it their entire career. And so I don't know why this is coming, like when Kurt Weill makes a new record, I'm not checking it for trip hop beats.
Right.
I'm like, he made another Kurt Weill record and no one makes them as good as he does. And I do think that there's something.
I always love reading Mogwai reviews and Pitchfork because it's like everyone is 7.6.
Yeah, because they know what they do and they mine the same furrow. And I do think that there is an element of self-knowledge and humility within great artistry to know what you're good at and know what you enjoy doing and continuing to work within that rather than saying, because you can then stumble into mistakes, and we'll get to a few from you can do it 2 ways. You can stumble into a mistake from ambition and ego, or you can stumble into it from just testing your limits.
Yes.
And there's a very different spirit and flavor to those kinds of missteps, I think.
Well,
but Gilligan is one of the greats, I think, for his consistency.
Yeah, and I think what Armstrong does with Mountainhead, you'll see, is right within the language of Succession without writing an episode of Succession or Succession movie.
Because it's the way he writes. I think we overpraise diversity of ability rather than like exceptionalism or specialization.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, I kind of feel that way about Sorkin is when people are like, well, he's written that scene 100 times or he's written that line in different ways 50 times. I'm like, it's a pretty good line.
It's pretty good.
Let's talk a little bit about Matthew Weiner.
Mm-hmm.
So he came up also through network writer rooms, worked on Becker, worked on The Naked Truth, the Téa Leoni smash. Obviously, is best known for Mad Men. It ended in 2015, and it's worth noting
This was just the 10-year anniversary of
yeah,
that.
that's right. I feel like during COVID and post-COVID, there was another batch of I've rewatched Mad Men, and it in fact is the best show ever made.
There's an argument.
Since then, he wrote a feature film towards the end of Mad Men and directed it called Are You Here, which was roundly rejected.
Mm-hmm.
He did The Romanoffs, which was an anthology series for Amazon Prime during their, we just give people money to do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also more or less roundly rejected.
Yes.
He also had some problems off, like extra professional problems or problems related to alleged professional behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then he has pretty much been out of the mix.
I mean, there was an FX thing maybe that we heard about.
Yes.
There was some...
a dramedy with a tinge of mystery that was being developed in 2020-something.
Went away.
And I cannot confirm this, but I read that he was being paid to develop a series based on the Nicole Kidman thriller Dead Calm.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's true. I don't... But,
one safe rule of thumb in this town, all caps this town,
mm-hmm.
Everyone on this list is being paid handsomely to develop something right now.
Yeah.
No one is taking a few to find themselves.
Yes.
Everyone's working. It's just a question of what stage of work it is.
I didn't have any like lessons from Matthew Weiner's career other than treat people decently, but like,
yeah,
I mean, he obviously is chiefly responsible for one of the greatest shows to ever be on screen. And also, I think got a little lost in his own sauce on Romanoffs. And
for sure.
I don't know what, putting aside like his personal issues, I don't know what do you think? I guess he's also older because he'd been working in, in television for a while, but I don't know what really to take from him. I just thought it was noteworthy that this is someone who was arguably at the sort of the pinnacle of the medium and is now no longer really working.
I mean, he's 2 years older than Vince Gilligan.
Oh, okay. I thought he was older.
He's 59. It's funny, like most people don't even get to make a masterpiece. Most people don't even get to make something that is good or beloved. He made something that is in the conversation for the greatest show of all time.
Yeah.
He's good, in terms of like legacy. And again, I don't fault people for maybe not being able to do it again or have a second incredibly brilliant, profound thing to say. I think it's interesting to compare him to David Chase, his mentor, and sometimes like, bête noire in terms of like the way That's What the Money Is For scene is famously inspired by his, in that scene in Weiner's Psychology, he's Peggy and David Chase is Don Draper. David Chase made The Sopranos and will be remembered forever for it. He also made it closer to the end of his career. He was in his 50s, I think, when that actually happened. And he had spent a career being very, very, very successful by all television at that time standards and by any like financial metric that anyone would want to use in America. But he was miserable.
Yeah.
He made his masterpiece, and it's treated differently from Weiner's masterpiece because of where it fell in his life cycle and in his CV. You know what I mean? So I think the only other thing to take away from this is 59 is, as long as he's not drinking Aquafina, I think he's going to be fine for a long time. And he still could come back. He still could have more to say. TV is not an easy medium to be like, you know what, I got a crazy little notion here. I'm just going to rip it off. Like if he was writing books in a solitary conceit, he could write a weird book of short stories, get it out of his system, and then write another novel over 10 years.
Yeah.
A lot of things have to fall into place to give him the opportunity to drive the car again, to get onto the road. But that said, it is noteworthy, and maybe it speaks to some of the interpersonal stuff, that some of the people we're going to talk about have found ways to continue to spark joy by collaborating. Yeah. Once they've said their mission, they've made their masterpiece.
And Mad Men is arguably the most complete and colorful and deep television experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like being like, hey, Chuck Yeager, like what else did you do besides break the sound barrier?
And by the way, just to reiterate the conceit here, we're not talking about Chase because we didn't cover The Sopranos on the podcast.
Yeah, this isn't like who are the best showrunners ever.
No, we're not talking about The Wire because that ended before we started podcasting.
Next up, I have Mike Schur.
He's been on the podcast.
He has been on the podcast. And he came up through SNL, The Office, as a comedy writer. Mm-hmm. He worked with Greg Daniels, so he was under all these people kind of apprenticed under someone else and then kind of graduated. Mike Schur is best known as the co-creator and writer of Parks and Recreation and then the creator and showrunner of The Good Place, both of which ended over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Since then, he's co-created Brooklyn Nine-Nine, co-wrote an episode of Black Mirror, co-created Rutherford Falls, worked on a scrapped Field of Dreams series for Peacock, which I still want to see.
He still wants to make it. He's still bitter about it.
Helped produce Hacks, helped produce our buddy Shea Serrano's Primo, produced or worked as a producer on Aziz Ansari's Master of None, and he now works on A Man on the Inside, which he created for Netflix. And
he's doing a new Amy Poehler show called Dig, a news broken on the Good Hang with Kai McMullen podcast, I believe.
And what's Dig? Do we know what Dig's about?
I believe archaeologists. It's based on a conceit. I don't know. I don't want to speak to it. Kaya could.
I think it's about a group of female archaeologists doing a dig in Greece.
Oh, wow. How fun is that?
Mike is a great, he's a great guy. He's also a great example of a different conception of the role, and maybe it's partly because it's comedy, but he has a really, really robust coaching tree.
Yes.
People seem to come out of the experience working for him feeling empowered and excited, and then he often helps people achieve what they're doing next, whether it's Aziz Ansari, who is on the cast of Parks and Rec, who wants to make a show and does it through Mike's banner. Jen Statsky, one of the co-creators of Hacks, worked on The Good Place. There are a lot of other great veterans of the shows.
I mean, like a lot of, Stupinski and
they were on The Office.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying the surrounding word cloud of all.
We already said Joe Mandy. He was on the staff of Parks and Rec. I think in that sense, it is a both old-fashioned that he just keeps working and giving people opportunities, and whether it's not his passion project, he makes space for other people to have their passion projects. And look, a lot of people. Those of us who've done a lot of therapy know that a lot of what your identity ultimately ends up being is parental modeling. And I think that maybe there's a professional corollary here too. He went from SNL, which is a fierce but deeply collaborative kind of place, to The Office, where we heard Mike talk about this on Amy Poehler's podcast about what kind of collaborator Greg Daniels was, and who he invited into his circle to have a stake in the show they were making. People like Mindy Kaling, BJ Novak, and so he has tried to pay that forward with co-creation and executive producing, and that's a very, I think, psychologically and professionally healthy way to be.
Yeah, the reason why I threw Mike in here, aside from the fact that I wanted to have someone who's largely known for comedies, is where I feel like Jesse Armstrong looks into the human heart and sees cobwebs.
Yeah.
Mike Schur ultimately sees like a tender beating organ. And
very sweet.
I think even at this point, like his shows have gotten, I wouldn't say saccharine, increasingly sweeter. The Ted Danson show is almost too sweet for the way I'd like my coffee.
Yeah.
But I admire how he takes a sensibility and a worldview and translates it into these different stories. And he seems like he is very good at balancing ideas with real nuts and bolts. Like, here's how you make an episode of TV. Here's how you make a season of TV.
And I think he was uniquely qualified to shepherd television comedy into this current, more serialized era. It really struck me when rewatching Parks and Rec and rewatching The Good Place with my daughters that like these shows really relate to younger audiences, not just because they're incredibly sweet and incredibly funny, but because they move.
Yeah.
And as someone who grew up, I mean, he says his favorite show of all time is Cheers. Cheers did not move. There was a fight with Gary's Bar every year, and Carla was married to someone else. Otherwise, that was basically the show for 8 or 9 years, right? Those shows were really, really relished in changing the status quo and moving forward it's not a rhythm that matches serialized dramas, but at least can be considered in the same breath as. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Should we do Damon?
Yeah, Damon is interesting too. Do you want to run through it?
Let's do Damon Lindelof, who came up also through network television, working on a variety of shows like Nash Bridges.
Yeah.
He is obviously best known for Lost, but for the purposes of me and Andy's relationship to his work, I think almost, even though you started out recapping Lost for Vulture, right?
No, I never did Lost.
Oh, you never did Lost?
I think it was done. Maybe I did the end. I don't remember.
Oh, I thought that was like one of your
No, I would just call you and read you Jeff Jensen's recaps in a really excited way.
But for our purposes, we're talking a little bit about his work on The Leftovers, which ended in 2017. And since then, he has created The Watchmen, which is also one of the great shows that we've gotten the privilege to talk about over the last decade and a half. He wrote a horror movie called The Hunt, which was famously I can't remember what it was, like the last movie before COVID or the movie that I can't remember. Like,
yeah, it fell apart because of COVID, right?
No, I mean, it was
released in theaters. I mean, right. But then it was held.
Yeah, it was. Yes. Yeah, it was held. He wrote an unproduced Star Wars movie.
He sure did. It was going to be awesome.
And he is the executive producer and a writer on the upcoming Lantern series, which we're both very excited about on HBO. And executive produced and co-created and wrote on the Peacock series Mrs. Davis, but he did not showrun that.
So the way you just described The Hunt and COVID is often, I think, the way that Damon feels internally about his role as showrunner, because he, along with his partner on Lost, Carlton Cuse, were kind of the first celebrity showrunners. They, maybe more than anyone else, helped popularize the term, not by anything they did, but because it was thrown around a lot when they were being interviewed on Jimmy Kimmel, and people were waiting with bated breath for their next comments on, who's in the hatch or whatever. So he, in ways that I think were and continue to be deeply uncomfortable for him, he became the face of an amorphous being known as the story of a show and its relationship with its fans. So he really rode that roller coaster for a long time. He's also been quite upfront with us personally, with us on the podcast, with many others when he does interviews, about how the job is fucking hard.
Yeah.
And takes up so much of your life, and how much of your energy, how much of your life, how much of your stress do you want to give over to it? So, it's no surprise that I think we both feel this way, that I'm like, you're good. Your Cooperstown plaque is already made.
Yeah.
To have made not just Lost, but also The Leftovers and Watchmen. You're good. I think it's really interesting, and maybe has some harmony with Mike Schur, and I know those two know each other and are friendly, that Damon seems excited about a phase of his career where he can pay it forward and work with people. Mrs. Davis was a series that was very intentionally, he was the co-creator of. The Star Wars movie was very intentionally a co-write with the great Justin Gibson. And his MO now seems to be like, I want to work with people. And by the way, on a personal level, I think it's great for him. I also think it's a very smart and savvy way to be alive in the industry as it is now, because it's not just that like we reject the auteur theory. The model of every 3 years I shall move heaven and earth to make my vision is really, really hard to do in a lot of ways. Not just like stressful, like it's incredibly hard.
Well, I mean, part of the reason why this is such a fascinating list is how few people are actually doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Now, Damon,
it's too punishing, maybe.
I think it's really
get the boulder up the hill.
One of the things that I didn't really mention when I was sort of setting up a brief history of showrunning over the last 15 years was the moment where we thought all the great film directors in the world were just going to make 6 to 10 hour series all the time. Yep. And so you had Cary Fukunaga and David Fincher and Steven Soderbergh making these kind of masterful, beautiful, visually provocative series. And that's fucking hard, dog. Yeah. Like, it's hard for them to do that. I think Soderbergh would have kept doing The Knick if he could do anything he wanted with The Knick.
Sure.
He was also in talks to give The Knick to anyone else, like who he, possibly Barry Jenkins, where he was like, we're going to try and think of a new way of doing the show. But I do find it interesting that Damon famously does not go to set, correct?
Yeah.
And Tony Gilroy did not go to set.
No.
He's like, I'd just be a pain in the ass there. I think he was like, we get everything so ready, and then we say to the directors, you guys do the coverage you want to do. Like, we don't,
And then you give me the pieces, and I'll put it together.
So it's interesting to see Jesse Armstrong directing Mountainhead. Now, one of the fascinating elements of it is that it does have aspects of Succession visual language.
Yeah.
And Mark Mylod is a executive producer on the show, but it's very curious to me. I would love to ask Jesse about like how much of Succession is visually also Jesse's idea?
Well, I think that's a good question to ask him. I think that one thing you do see about showrunners and their relationship to the job is it does make them have a different kind of reckoning with what level of control they need or want. There is 100% a successful avenue for showrunners who are like, I run everything, then I get to set and someone else is nominally in charge, even though I can tell them to do another, to do it again to get more. And that's a silly barrier because I know everything about this and I want to get involved in it. And, Vince Gilligan started directing on Breaking Bad and then directed the El Camino movie and is, and is a director now. There are a bunch of people on this list who have gone down that path.
We're going to get into some people who have come from the world of director-writer, become more maybe writers.
And Jesse too. Jesse's like, I know what this is, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear, that is not necessarily an active ego. Like usually people who are good collaborators remain good collaborators even when they're directors. They say to their director of photography, let's talk about this. And there, there's plenty of good examples of that. But there is another school of people who are just like, that's just not for me. Like let the people who are trained to do that, and then I'll pick up the pieces.
Can I ask you a question that you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but is it hard being in the middle?
No, see, I mean, yeah.
Is it hard being the person who's like, I am running the show and I wrote a lot of this and this is my idea, but I'm also okay with this director here saying like, let's do it this way?
There are many different types of directors and there are many different types of experiences. I have no desire on any level of my body to direct anything ever. And I know you did student film stuff. Like I think you like direction and there are people who like that. I don't think visually in that way. And it's a lot of work, like with the scouting and everything. And I would rather leave that to the professionals if anyone would even ask me to do it, which for the record, I'm not saying that they had. I'm not interested. Thank you.
We should definitely clip that.
No, I'm always trying to be careful that I'm not acting as if that this is some like noble decision that I'm making here. I found it in the same way that I found it just truly inspiring to work with writers who have a completely different brain than I have, or costumers or gaffers who do things that I could never do, working with collaborative directors who make it a conversation, who help me see things their way, and then you work together in a really interesting symbiotic way is beautiful. And then there are times when there are directors who are like, this is how I do it. And you're like, you've given me nothing, you've given me ashes. But only in the sense that you're making it hard, you are being so decisive and distinctive, but you're not thinking about, and this is the challenge for episodic directors generally, how do we fit this into a diorama that you don't even see the whole picture of? And that is something, and again, to be fair, any director of any ability or ambition who works in episodic TV finds this maddening. That they come in with a style already established and then have to do a relay race handoff to someone that they may never even meet. That's asking a lot. And so it's hard for them to find their voice within that structure.
The next person coming up is I wanted to talk about because this was she embodies the larger than life showrunner to me in some ways. And the showrunner as avatar for everything that people feel about their work, they project onto her, and that's Lena Dunham. So she obviously came up through independent cinema, part of like the unofficially mumblecore scene in New York City, like hipster art world of that.
You were in that world, weren't you?
I absolutely was. I still mumble. And is best known for Girls, which also ended in 2017. And since then, she split with her creative partner on Girls, Jenny Connor, but Camping was sort of the last thing to come out that had both their names, I believe. Camping was not a success. She appeared in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed the first episode of Industry, which I love. It features still one of my favorite moments in the series is the end of Industry, episode 1. And she also directed the films Sharp Stick and Catherine Called Birdie. I bring her up not only because she ran shit for a while there, like and basically lived rent-free in everyone's head for 5 years, but also because she has a new Netflix series coming out this summer called Too Much, which is her first series basically since Girls. This was a weird time where everybody was like, Lena Dunham, I want to be you, but I also hate you.
Yes.
And obviously that level of passion, I think she would say, did a number on her. And she spent a lot of the intervening years grappling with different ways to sort of relate to and reject the discourse around her work, Girls.
Mm-hmm.
What are your kind of current thoughts on her?
I think she's an amazing person to have in this exercise because, like we were saying about where David Chase's big success fell in his career, and how that affects our perception of them. I mean, Lena Dunham's whole thing was that she was younger than everybody, and this was incredible. She had this opportunity, and she was the V of her G, as they say in adults premiere. And as you have been saying recently, because I think you've done some rewatching, like Girls is still a little bit him, right? Like
Girls is goated.
Yeah,
it's so good.
It's really, really good. It's really, really funny. I loved revisiting it for Stick the Landing last year.
You were with us then, right,
Kaya?
Kaya?
Yeah, I put Girls on my best of the decade list.
But were you with us at the end of Girls?
When the show ended? I don't.
It's in
No,
17?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But the point being, if done right, and you drink the right water, life is long.
Yeah.
And careers can be long. And I think what's remarkable about, she did lots of work that, you just mentioned over the last few years, but she just had her 39th birthday last week. Like, she's still younger than a lot of these creators were when they had their first success.
Yeah.
So to come back with a show that is clearly a priority for her and a passion project for her on Netflix at the same moment when we're also hearing like, oh, she's directing a new Natalie Portman movie. I am a fan of second acts.
Yeah.
Because I think that if done right, a creative life has many, many acts in it. It's not even just two. So I think it's cool. I think it's exciting. And I am also very curious what her second act looks like in the sense of, it's probably more likely to be she will come back and hit things when she wants to hit them and work on what she wants to work on. It's less like community building of like-minded artists who she's empowering, which is fine.
Yeah.
Not everyone is wired that way. Some, being both an artist and a manager, sometimes those two things don't exist in the same brain. It's rare when they do.
I was thinking about like the sort of reception of Girls when it was on, and it was obviously, I think, for as passionately as it was discussed and in times negatively, it was beloved when it was first on. And then I think people started to reject where the characters wound up because those characters like basically saw where those characters ended up as a rejection of who they were as audience members, because they identified so closely with various members of the cast. So it'll be fascinating to see her re-engage with that. And I don't know, maybe at that time of watching TV and sort of identifying a central kind of creative force behind shows and being like, I can't believe you did this,
But I think the difference is, and you haven't watched too much yet, have you? The new series? Girls, what's interesting, and I'm not saying this would have been better, but if Girls was released into this moment, the audience would have been more primed for it being a very particular passion project of someone that maybe would only go 3 years, and those 3 years might take 6 years.
Yeah.
Girls was delivered into an ecosystem that, frankly, you and I both miss of you're going to hit your release date every year for as long as the show is on the air. And some of the show's loudest or messiest growing pains were probably because of that expectation and schedule. I think some of the show's weakest moments were when it was just literally reacting to the reviews of the previous season. Like when Donald Glover, who might be on our list, shows up in like season 2 premiere, I believe. But then also the fact that collaboration for when it was going with Jenny Connor was so fruitful because I think that it was a really exciting marriage between people who had very, very different visions of how to cultivate art and how to deliver on it. So we don't know, but I do think she's more attuned to this current moment, or the moment has met her.
Why don't we skip to and end with Donald Glover? Because I had a couple of other people here, like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Benioff and Weiss. We can talk about them next week, or we can do this again sometime. But I wanted to do Glover.
Before we do, the only thing I wanted to, and I'm sorry, and I know that we're doing it because we're running out of time here, but like the Benioff and Weiss, I'm always pausing so people don't think we're talking about Benjamin Off and Weiss. Because they went from Game of Thrones to, the rumors of Confederate, right? To Three Body Problem, which I, kind of controversially
liked.
With
a Star Wars trilogy deal in between.
In between. That there is in terms of hangovers from previous generations of showrunning and the industry, I think there is a curse of too muchness and a curse of success. Benioff, in particular, great writer, and, we love his novel City of Thieves. He loves it. He won't let it be optioned because he wants to make it someday himself. he has yet to do that because he's too busy satisfying the demands of these 9-figure massive genre deals that he keeps signing.
Yeah.
Because that is what people expect of them. And I have to think that at some point, the two of them turn to each other and they're like, remember that indie film we used to talk about making? Do you know what I mean?
I'm sure, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not begrudging them their success,
No, I
their
mean-
ambition, certainly their income. But it is, I do wonder if when Three Body Problem wraps up, which is sooner than I think anyone intended it, for it to wrap up, it seemed like it was going to be pitched as like the next decade-long
Sure.
obsession. And now they're like, can we do this in 7 episodes, 2 seasons?
Is that kid's brain coming back from space?
Can we,
anytime
can we, it's too late to send a return to sender order on that?
Yeah.
That in the midst of all of it, they were, that maybe they would kind of like to regroup.
Make 25th Hour? Yeah.
Regroup, reframe,
Yeah.
right?
Glover, let's just do briefly because I do want to talk about one element of this. So obviously Glover comes up through comedy and sketch and sitcoms, working on 30 Rock, and then going on to be one of the ensemble in Community, learns under Dan Harmon, et cetera, makes Atlanta. Atlanta's fucking incredible and ends in 2022, is one of the most creatively boundary-pushing series that we've gotten a chance to talk about, even when we weren't quite singing from the same hymn book. I think we always were like, this guy is really like on his own journey.
It was one of one, and I think we said maybe too much at the time. I don't think that show was under any obligation to meet our standards.
No, of course not. Yeah, I mean,
even if we didn't like this 3rd season as much as the 4th or
since
whatever.
then, he's co-created Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Francesca Sloan, and he co-created or created Swarm.
EP'd
Swarm with Janine Neighbors, and so he's like, he's in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. The thing I wanted to mention about Glover, I think this kind of follows Donald Glover around in his music career and his film appearances, and especially in his television show running or creator life, is it's almost like what Benioff and Weiss carry around, but it's to some extent it's a good place to end because it's about what Jesse Armstrong will probably carry around, which is Donald Glover has to be cool. Like he always has to be cool.
I like that.
And Jesse Armstrong is kind of probably always going to have to be funny. I don't know what I would have thought of a Jesse Armstrong movie or television show that didn't make me laugh. It's not to say I wouldn't like it, but it would be almost breathtaking to see Donald Glover do something about like super normal people, And even in the world of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which of course in the Doug Liman movie version of it, they're dressed well and they're sexy and all that. But the extraordinary lengths he goes to have this impeccably interior
White
design,
sweater,
the costumes, like everything about it is so fucking cool. And I was wondering whether or not like that can sort of be great because like maybe it's effortless and maybe everything he does has got this kind of magic dust on it. And the same thing can go for Jesse. And he's always going to be him when he writes, and it's going to be funny. But it's probably a lot to carry around as you get older.
I think this is a good place to wrap it up because what we're speaking to is an odd thing to say about writers. Actors always have to manage their brand as well as their
appearance,
their talent, and also have to have an almost disturbing, honestly, self-awareness of what people like in them, what they're looking for in them, what puts them in the right light, not always the most attractive light if they want to like go to get an Oscar or whatever, but like understanding their instrument in a way, and keeping time to that rhythm as much as to their own internal creative metronome. And I think that writers, being anonymous and often uggos, don't have to self-manage to that degree and can have a little bit more creative freedom and hide behind the words and hide behind the page. The rise of the celebrity showrunner has meant a different level of expectation, that there is a more plugged-in creative class of audience who do say, like we're talking about Department Q, there might be people, and probably a lot of people on Netflix around the world saying, oh, a Scandi Noir, I'll watch it. But then there are people who are like, Scott Frank.
Yeah.
He did these 3 things that were matter to me, and I'm expecting a certain level of something, and so I'm going to look at it through that lens. Damon, next time he comes on, maybe we'll talk about it. But his personal taste lends itself towards, twisty storytelling. But he carries with him the self-knowledge that people are checking every little road to make sure it's not a cul-de-sac to nowhere or like a rabbit hole that someone's going to fall into. And that's does create a second consciousness, I think, for people when the creative decisions they make behind the camera.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see if he makes another series.
Jesse.
No, Donald Glover.
Oh yeah.
Or whether or not he moves more into features or just starts to indulge more in acting, or kind of just keeps going with this, like, I'll get something started with my name, but it's really somebody else's project or whatever.
I think the other lesson here that we'll carry into Monday is when we go through these people and we talk about hits and misses or like long gaps to reinvent themselves, hitting when the iron is actually still super hot does seem smart.
Yeah.
I don't think any one of the people we mentioned came back as quickly as Jesse is doing, other than maybe with the exception of Better Call Saul coming pretty quickly on the heels of Breaking Bad. And maybe there's a comparison to be made there. This is what I'm good at. I'm comfortable with who I am.
Yeah. These are the kind of people I want to write about. These issues still matter to me.
Here's some more.
Yeah.
And if it's not just that if Mountainhead was 5 years from now, maybe if it was under a normal post-production cycle and it was a year from now, maybe people will be like, oh, he's still doing this?
Yeah.
I think it was smart to read the room and to read the politics and be like, I actually still have something to say. And while the microphone is still plugged in, I'm going to grab it.
Well, we're going to talk about Mountainhead on Monday. We'll also talk about Department Q. We will be back on Monday. It's been a while since we actually hit a Monday show. Thanks to Kaya and thanks to John for producing. Thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.
Let's go get some lidocaine patches.